Wind tore across the bow of the cruise ship, sharp with salt and engine heat, whipping loose papers and rattling the metal railings like warning bells. Leo stood a few steps back from the front safety barrier, one hand braced against the cold steel, watching a scene he couldn't quite believe was real. The ocean stretched endlessly below, deep blue and indifferent, while above it all a woman's voice cut through the air, loud enough to overpower the wind. "Do you understand how rules work?" Susan shouted, her words snapping like flags in a storm. She was close to the edge, planted firmly, as if daring the ship itself to challenge her authority. Her white sleeveless dress with large light blue flowers fluttered violently around her knees, but she didn't seem to notice. Her blonde hair, stiffly styled, refused to cooperate with the wind and kept slapping against her face. In one hand she gripped a dark clipboard, knuckles pale, the other slicing through the air with sharp, angry gestures. Her face was flushed, eyes wide and unblinking, mouth open mid-yell as if she'd been shouting for hours and had no intention of stopping now. The captain stood directly in front of her, no more than a few feet away. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a crisp white uniform that looked almost unreal against the chaos of the moment. His cap sat straight, his posture relaxed but unyielding. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't interrupt. He simply listened, hands folded loosely behind his back, gaze steady, expression unreadable. Behind them, visible through the forward-facing glass and railings, passengers gathered in clusters. Some pressed closer to the windows. Others leaned over interior rails on the upper decks, their faces a mosaic of curiosity, discomfort, and quiet anticipation. Phones were held low but ready. No one spoke. No one needed to. The tension was loud enough. Leo felt his stomach tighten. He hadn't planned on being here. Hadn't planned on watching a stranger unravel at the front of a cruise ship before noon on what was supposed to be a relaxing week. He was 38, tired in a way sleep didn't fix, and this trip had been his attempt to disappear for a while. No deadlines. No meetings. No explaining himself to anyone. Just ocean, routine, and anonymity. That anonymity shattered the moment Susan turned her attention outward, sweeping the invisible crowd with a glare that felt accusatory even from where Leo stood. She pointed the clipboard toward the captain's chest, as if it were a badge of authority instead of laminated paper. "I am telling you," she said, voice shaking now with something sharper than anger. "This ship cannot function if people are allowed to do whatever they want. Someone has to enforce standards." The captain nodded once, slowly, the way people do when they're deciding how much patience they have left. Earlier that morning, none of this had seemed inevitable. Leo had been on the upper deck with a paper cup of burnt coffee, watching the horizon split the sky cleanly in half. The ship had hummed beneath his feet, steady and reassuring. He remembered thinking, absurdly, that it felt good to be carried somewhere without having to steer. Susan had been there too, though he hadn't known her name then. She'd stood out immediately, not because of how she looked, but because of how she moved. Purposeful. Inspecting. She'd walked the deck the way someone walks a property they believe belongs to them, eyes scanning for flaws. When a couple laughed too loudly near the pool, she frowned. When a crew member passed without making eye contact, she stiffened. The first confrontation happened near the buffet. A teenager had lingered too long over the dessert station, debating between cakes. Susan stepped forward, placed herself directly beside him, and cleared her throat loudly. "There's a line," she said, tapping her clipboard against the counter. The boy flushed and moved on, without arguing. The crew member offered Susan an apologetic smile she hadn't earned. Leo noticed, but he told himself it wasn't his business. Ships were full of strange people. That was part of the deal. By midday, it was impossible to ignore her. Susan had corrected a man about chair placement on the sun deck, informed a woman that children shouldn't run after a certain hour, and loudly reminded a group of friends that music volume was a shared responsibility. Each time, she spoke with absolute certainty, as if the rules she cited existed simply because she believed in them hard enough. The moment it became personal for Leo happened fast and publicly. He'd set his backpack beside an empty lounge chair while he went to grab a towel. When he returned, Susan was standing over it. "You can't leave personal items unattended," she said, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. Leo blinked. "I was gone maybe 2 minutes." "That doesn't matter," she replied. "It creates disorder." He laughed, thinking she was joking. She did not laugh back. "I need you to move this," she continued, already writing something on her clipboard. "I'm documenting repeated issues." "Documenting for who?" Leo asked. "For the ship," Susan said, as if that explained everything. When a crew member approached, drawn by the raised voices, Susan didn't pause. She turned on him too, explaining at length how lax enforcement led to chaos, how people like Leo took advantage of systems unless corrected. The crew member listened politely, nodded, and assured her he'd handle it. He gave Leo an apologetic glance that carried more exhaustion than sympathy. Leo moved his bag, more stunned than angry, but something settled uneasily in his chest. This wasn't about rules. This was about control. Susan escalated quickly after that. She began inserting herself into conversations, interrupting crew instructions to add her own, questioning safety procedures she clearly didn't understand. Each time someone pushed back, she raised her voice, citing experience, citing authority that no one had granted her. When the captain finally appeared on deck, responding to a growing cluster of complaints, Susan saw her opportunity. She marched straight toward him, clipboard raised like a shield. "This has gone on long enough," she said, voice carrying. "I demand to speak with whoever is actually in charge." The captain introduced himself calmly. Susan barely let him finish. Leo watched from a short distance as the crowd thickened, as curiosity hardened into expectation. The captain gestured toward the front of the ship, inviting Susan to continue the conversation somewhere safer, quieter. She agreed loudly, as if she were the one granting permission. Now, standing at the bow with the wind roaring and the ocean yawning below, Susan looked larger than life, fueled by an audience and her own certainty. Leo edged closer, unable to look away. Susan inhaled sharply, shoulders lifting, as if drawing strength from a crowd she pretended not to see. Her eyes flicked toward the glass, registering the silhouettes watching her, and for a moment Leo thought he saw hesitation. It vanished instantly. She straightened, chin high, and spoke faster, louder, stacking words on top of each other in a rush that sounded rehearsed. "I've dealt with situations like this for years," she said. "I know how quickly things fall apart when leadership refuses to lead. People like him," she added, jerking her head in Leo's direction without looking at him, "push boundaries because no one stops them." Leo felt heat rise in his face. He hadn't said a word, hadn't moved, yet he was suddenly part of her story, cast as an example of disorder. A few passengers shifted behind the glass. Someone shook their head. The captain's gaze followed Susan's gesture, landing on Leo. There was no accusation there, only awareness. He returned his attention to Susan, still silent. "That silence," Susan pressed on, mistaking restraint for surrender, "is exactly the problem." The wind surged again, snapping the hem of her dress hard against her legs. The clipboard rattled as she tightened her grip. Leo noticed the small details then, the way her foot tapped once against the deck, the way her words were starting to tangle at the edges. She was running on momentum now, on the belief that if she kept pushing, something would give. Leo's heart pounded. Part of him wanted to step forward, to say something, anything, but another part knew better. This wasn't his confrontation anymore. It had grown past him, past any single complaint or rule. It was about who held power here and who only pretended to. The captain finally shifted his weight. It was a subtle movement, barely noticeable, but the effect was immediate. Susan stopped mid-sentence, thrown off by the smallest change. Behind the glass, the crowd leaned in as one. Leo held his breath, the ocean roaring below, the ship surging ahead, certain that whatever came next would change the course of the entire cruise. The captain's shift was subtle, but it changed the air instantly. Susan noticed it too. Her voice faltered for half a second, just long enough to betray uncertainty, before she surged forward again, louder than before, as if volume alone could reassert control. "Don't look at him," she snapped, pointing again without turning. This is about the ship, about safety, about standards. I'm trying to help you. The captain finally spoke, his voice calm and measured, barely raised above the wind. Ma'am, I understand your concerns. Susan smiled tightly, the kind of smile that didn't reach the eyes. Good. Then you understand why I need your crew to start enforcing proper conduct immediately. Leo felt the weight of every watching eye shift between them. From behind the glass, passengers leaned closer, drawn by the rare spectacle of authority meeting resistance head-on. No one interrupted. The silence between Susan's words stretched just long enough to make her uncomfortable. The captain nodded once. We already do. Susan laughed, sharp and dismissive. Clearly not. She launched into a rapid list of grievances, each one more inflated than the last. Noise violations, improper use of shared spaces, crew members who encourage disorder by being too relaxed. She spoke as if she were presenting evidence in a courtroom, pacing a short line along the bow, heels clicking against the deck, clipboard flipping open and shut. Leo watched the captain's face carefully. There was no anger there, no defensiveness. Instead, there was patience, the kind honed by years of dealing with storms that couldn't be argued with. He let her talk. He let her dig. Susan mistook that patience for weakness. She stepped closer, invading the captain's space, lowering her voice just enough to sound conspiratorial while still being heard. You might not realize it yet, she said, but people like me are your best allies. We see problems before they explode. Leo clenched his jaw. People like her. The phrase landed heavy, soaked in entitlement. The captain took a single step back, re-establishing distance. Ma'am, he said evenly, this ship operates under maritime law and company policy. Passengers are not authorized to enforce rules on other passengers. Susan froze. For the first time since Leo had met her, she was silent. The wind rushed in to fill the gap, tugging at her dress, rattling the railings. Her eyes narrowed. So you're saying I should just let people do whatever they want? She asked. I'm saying, the captain replied, that if there's an issue, you report it to the crew. Susan scoffed. I did. Repeatedly. Nothing changed. Leo felt something shift inside him then. The story she was telling didn't match reality, and he knew he wasn't the only one who noticed. He caught the eye of a woman behind the glass who had been corrected by Susan earlier that day. She shook her head slightly, lips pressed together. Susan resumed pacing, faster now. I've managed communities for years, she said. You don't get order by asking nicely. You get it by setting consequences. The captain's gaze followed her calmly. This is not a community association. It's the same principle, Susan insisted. People need boundaries. Leo couldn't help himself. They have boundaries, he said, voice steady but loud enough to carry. They're just not yours. Susan whipped around, eyes blazing. Excuse me. The captain raised a hand, not toward Leo, but toward Susan. Sir, he said without looking back, thank you. I've got this. Leo fell silent, heart hammering. He hadn't planned to speak, but it was too late now. The line had been crossed again, and this time it was public. Susan rounded on the captain, anger flushing her face. You see, she said, this is exactly what I'm talking about. Disrespect. Undermining authority. The captain met her gaze. You are not the authority here. The words landed cleanly, without malice, without emphasis. That made them sharper. Susan laughed again, but the sound was brittle. That's your opinion. No, the captain said. That's a fact. Behind the glass, a murmur rippled through the crowd. Phones lifted a little higher now, no longer hidden. Susan noticed. Her eyes flicked toward the reflections, catching glimpses of herself framed by the ship's interior, by faces watching, recording. You're making a mistake, she said, lowering her voice. I have a following. People listen to me. The captain inclined his head slightly. Then I suggest you set a better example. Susan bristled. Are you threatening me? No, he replied. I'm informing you. The wind surged again, and for a moment the ship seemed to lean into it, steady and unmoved. Susan's grip tightened on the clipboard until the plastic creaked. Leo noticed her breathing then, quick and shallow, The way people breathe when they're losing control but refuse to admit it. She changed tactics. Her voice softened, her shoulders relaxing, as if she were offering compromise. "Look, we got off on the wrong foot," she said. "I just want this cruise to be enjoyable for everyone." The captain waited. "I can help," Susan continued. "You give me limited authority, unofficially. I keep things running smoothly. You don't have to deal with constant complaints." Leo almost laughed at the audacity. Around him, others shifted, disbelief playing on their faces. The captain shook his head. "That won't be happening." Susan's mask slipped completely then. "So that's it," she demanded. "You're just going to ignore everything I've said?" "I've heard you," the captain said. "And I've made my position clear." Susan's voice rose again, sharp and uncontrolled. "This ship is going to descend into chaos." Leo glanced behind the glass. Children laughed somewhere inside. A couple shared a drink, unaware or unconcerned. The cruise looked exactly as it should have, calm and orderly, despite Susan's predictions. "You're overreacting," Leo said quietly, unable to stop himself. Susan spun toward him. "You don't get to speak." The captain's expression hardened, just slightly. "He does," he said. "Everyone does. Within reason." Susan opened her mouth, then closed it again, visibly recalibrating. She looked around, truly seeing the audience now. The phones. The faces. The fact that this moment was no longer private, no longer controllable. She straightened, lifting her chin. "Fine," she said. "If you won't act, I will." The captain raised an eyebrow. "How exactly do you plan to do that?" Susan smiled, slow and confident. "I'll make sure people know what kind of operation you're running." Leo felt a chill that had nothing to do with the wind. Threats like that didn't come from strength. They came from desperation. The captain turned slightly, pressing a hand to the radio clipped at his shoulder. He didn't speak into it yet. He simply rested his fingers there, thoughtful. Susan followed his gaze, realization dawning too late that she might have pushed too far. Behind the glass, the crowd leaned in again, breath held, as the captain finally took a breath of his own and prepared to respond. The captain's fingers rested on the radio, unmoving, as Susan waited for him to blink first. The wind carried the smell of salt and fuel, mixing with the sharp tension hanging over the bow. Leo felt the moment stretch, heavy and fragile, like glass under pressure. Susan shifted her weight, her confidence wobbling just enough to notice. The captain finally pressed the button and spoke quietly, requesting security and guest services forward. He released the radio and looked at Susan calmly, not with anger, but with certainty, and that certainty unsettled her more than shouting ever could. Susan's eyes widened for a fraction of a second before she masked it with a scoff. "Calling backup already," she said, forcing a laugh that sounded thin against the wind. "That tells me everything I need to know." Leo watched her tighten her grip on the clipboard, the edges bending slightly under her fingers. The captain did not respond. He simply stood there, grounded and unyielding, as though the ship itself had lent him its stability. The silence he allowed was deliberate, and Susan filled it with restless movement, pacing and muttering under her breath. Passengers behind the glass shifted closer, drawn by the unmistakable signal that something decisive was unfolding. Leo could see reflections of their faces layered over Susan's rigid posture, over the captain's calm stance. The moment felt suspended between outcomes. Susan cleared her throat loudly. "You're overreacting," she said. "This is unnecessary." The captain met her gaze. "What's unnecessary," he replied evenly, "is continuing this conversation without witnesses who can document it properly." The word document made Susan flinch, though she tried to hide it by lifting her chin defiantly. Security arrived first, 2 officers moving with practice calm, positioning themselves slightly behind the captain. Guest services followed, their expressions professional but alert. Susan's voice rose immediately. "Good," she said. "You can all hear this. I'm being harassed for trying to maintain order." Leo felt a spark of disbelief ripple through the crowd. The captain turned slightly, addressing the newcomers with quiet efficiency. He summarized the situation without embellishment, listing behaviors, not accusations. Susan opened her mouth repeatedly, trying to interrupt, but the captain continued until he finished. When he finally turned back to her, Susan launched into protest, words tumbling over each other. She accused passengers of provoking her, crew members of ignoring her concerns, the captain of undermining her efforts. Each claim sounded thinner than the last. Leo noticed the way security exchanged brief glances, the way guest services began taking notes. Susan noticed too. Her voice grew sharper, more desperate, volume climbing as control slipped further from her grasp. "None of this would have happened if you'd just listened," Susan insisted. "I warned you. I warned all of you." The captain raised a hand, stopping her mid-sentence. "Ma'am," he said, his tone unchanged, "multiple passengers have submitted formal complaints about your conduct." Susan froze. The wind rushed past them, filling the pause. Leo saw the exact moment realization struck her, the flicker of calculation behind her eyes as she understood the scale had tipped. "That's impossible," Susan said quickly. "They're exaggerating." The captain nodded slightly. "That's why we document everything." He gestured toward guest services. Statements, timestamps, video evidence. The word video landed heavily. Susan's gaze darted toward the glass, toward the raised phones she could no longer pretend not to see. Her breathing quickened. She laughed again, brittle and forced. "People record everything these days," she said. "That doesn't mean it's accurate." The captain regarded her steadily. "Accuracy is exactly why this process exists." Susan took a step back, heels scraping against the deck. Leo felt a strange mix of satisfaction and unease. He wasn't enjoying this, not exactly, but there was relief in watching accountability finally enter the space. Susan clutched her clipboard closer to her chest, as if it could shield her. "So what now?" she demanded. "You're just going to silence me?" "No," the captain replied. "We're going to set boundaries." Security stepped forward slightly, not touching her, but close enough to make their presence undeniable. Susan's voice wavered. "You can't do this," she said. "I paid to be here." The captain nodded once, and so did everyone else. His words were calm, but final. He explained the ship's code of conduct, the violations, the consequences. No threats. No insults. Just policy, spoken clearly and publicly. Susan's shoulders slumped with each sentence, her earlier bravado draining away. The crowd behind the glass remained silent, absorbed. Leo noticed a woman place a hand over her mouth, eyes wide. A man beside her nodded slowly, as if confirming something he'd suspected all along. Susan shook her head repeatedly. "This is ridiculous," she whispered. "I was helping." The captain's expression softened just slightly. "Intent doesn't erase impact," he said. "And impact matters." Guest services asked Susan to accompany them. She resisted at first, shaking her head, muttering about unfairness, about overreach. Security waited patiently. Eventually, with a sharp exhale, Susan turned and allowed herself to be guided away from the bow. As she passed Leo, her eyes flicked toward him, hard and searching, as if trying to assign blame one last time. Leo met her gaze without speaking. There was nothing left to say. As Susan disappeared through the doors, the tension dissolved almost instantly, like a storm breaking apart. Conversations resumed behind the glass, subdued but relieved. The captain thanked security and guest services quietly, dismissing them with nods. He turned toward the remaining passengers and offered a brief apology for the disturbance, his voice carrying easily now that the shouting had stopped. There was no applause, no celebration, just a collective exhale. Leo lingered at the bow, watching the ocean churn below, feeling the ship surge steadily forward. The wind felt different now, less sharp. He realized his hands had been clenched and forced them to relax. The captain caught his eye and inclined his head slightly, a gesture of acknowledgement rather than gratitude. Leo returned it, surprised by the weight of the moment settling in his chest. As the crowd dispersed and the bow cleared, Leo stayed where he was, staring out at the horizon. He knew the story would travel quickly across the ship, retold and reshaped, but the truth of it was simple. Authority, real authority, didn't shout. It didn't threaten. It waited, documented, and acted when necessary. Behind him, the doors slid closed, sealing away the echoes of confrontation, while ahead the ocean stretched on, endless and unconcerned, carrying the ship toward whatever came next.